I understand you teach culture.
I specialize in intercultural communication. So I actually wrote a paper on zombie movies. This is how I got into looking at horror movies, simultaneously obsessed and repelled by horror movies for my whole life. I also found that horror movies are a really fantastic vehicle for studying the things that different cultures fear and what they fear within their time. You know, what people are really scared of, what holds power because of fear behind it, how that relates to the human condition, and how some things are universal, whereas other things are relative. Like there are fears that we all have, like, for example, zombies in popular culture. If you look at the histories of zombies around the world, they're what's known as a metamyth. They've popped up in multiple different locations, in ancient times, a long time ago, as part of folklore in cultures that weren't connected to each other. So what that means is that they were speaking to kind of a universal fear.
So the components that you talk about in some of your favorite courses, you talk about components of like media imperialism.
Stuart Hall's model of encoding and decoding. Basically, he develops this really great model. You have these culture industries, like, for example, Disney is an example of a culture industry. We all know that Disney, first off, is a really great organization to study in terms of cultural imperialism, because it takes classic texts, folk texts that are not popular culture, and oftentimes are quite gruesome and violent and weird, and it kind of sanitizes them. As a culture industry, Disney finds these texts like Cinderella, like Mulan is a really great example of this. Cinderella is an example of it because it takes a grim fairy tale, which is real violent. All of these ones are Hansel and Gretel, like Little Red Riding Hood. These are violent stories. In the original Cinderella story, the glass slipper that doesn't fit cuts off one stepsister's heel and the other one's toe. I mean, that's horror, right?
I remember the birds
Yes.
that pick out, because in my work with the storytellers and storytelling, we look at folk tales, and the image of the birds like taking out the eyes of the sisters stayed with me.
Yeah, that's terrifying. That's horror, right? But what Disney does is it takes them and it sanitizes them. It also encodes US American values into these texts. So these Disney princess stories like Cinderella and Snow White and Sleeping Beauty are all about individualism. As a matter of fact, I mean, if you look at The Little Mermaid, she actually sings, a song about not fitting in and wanting to be in a different place than where she's from. And you see that in Mulan too. These Disney princesses are constantly singing these songs about how they need to be their own unique individuals. So again, what we're seeing using this Stuart Hall model is this culture industry, in this case Disney, taking these stories and encoding specific types of values into them as they take the texts and develop them for their release. What happens is people engage in social interaction about these topics. And as they are doing that, they decode the messages. And the encoding and decoding of the messages changes depending on the social and cultural context of what's going on. Like Jerry Springer comes and says, my show isn't real, right? I mean, these people are ringers. They are not real people. And this is really here to satirize these kinds of issues, right? But if you don't get that message and you don't know who Jerry Springer is, then you're not going to have any idea. And so you're not going to have that social context. People who are constructing messages specifically to get certain ideas out to other cultures and to feed them to the other cultures in a way in which they may only be consuming it without understanding the context. Once you teach people to be aware and conscious of the media that they're consuming, and that media itself is not neutral, and that pop culture messages are not neutral. And if you can teach people to kind of call it out when you see it, then you can change. You can resist pop cultural messages. It's absolutely a thing that you can do.
And recognizing the cognitive bias that we have, right? In that we often are purposefully looking. Like we're not, we are looking for stories that actually affirm our view of reality, and that will celebrate our view of reality. And that, after all, is what we're being packaged and sold what we want to watch to a certain extent. So it's a mirror and it's also a creator.